Who needs experimental research if we have big data? This webinar is organized by the PIGWEB project. The PIGWEB project is an infrastructure project for experimental research for sustainable pig production. And it intends to integrate and open up research infrastructures of European interest. It is a Horizon 2020 program that started March 2021 and will run for 5 years. My name is Giuseppe Bee, I'm the coordinator of this project. And you see the website and different social media outlets that we use to communicate about the project. The objectives of the PIGWEB project is to strengthen the pig research community and to provide and facilitate access to research infrastructures, improve and integrate the services provided by the research infrastructures, and to reinforce the culture of cooperation between the research community and industrial and societal stakeholders. And you see the different types of partners that we have in the project, ranging from research and research infrastructures, partners that provide these research infrastructures, dissemination, industry, and the management of the research project. The program is, I will provide a brief introduction, after which we have to change the program a little bit, because we plan to have Asger Christensen, from a member of the European Parliament, in our program. But unfortunately, last Friday, he sent us a message that he has to participate on a meeting for the Ukraine, this crisis in the Ukraine. So he could not participate. So what I will do is, in the next slides, I will give an overview of what Europe intends to do on animal experimentation, law that was a motion that was adopted in September. Then we will have speakers, Giuseppe Bee from Agroscope, who will talk about, do we still need animal experimentation? Then Carlos Piñeiro from PigChamp will talk about living farms. This is a new hybrid system for quality research. And then Eugenio will, as a young researcher, talk about his outlook, how he sees animal research in the future, because the tools that we are talking about today will be his tools for the years to come. And then Catherine Lazulle from INRAE will lead the discussion on the topic, and so we'll answer, direct your questions to the different speakers. So this is basically replacing Asger Christensen's presentation. You may be aware that the European Parliament accepted a motion in September last year on plans and actions to accelerate the transition to innovation without the use of animals in research, regular testing, and education. And I'll just highlight a few sentences that came from that motion, which I list here. So the Parliament calls on the Commission, the European Commission, to active phase out procedures on live animals for scientific and regulatory purposes as soon as scientifically possible, and without lowering the level of protection for human health and the environment. And you can see there's no mentioning about food production or agriculture in here. Also, they acknowledge that non-animal methods are not available yet across all scientific research disciplines. And the Parliament underlines also that there are cases where animal experiments are still needed to gain scientific insights in the long search for an effective remedy for certain diseases. So again, they accept that animals experiments are sometimes needed, but especially for diseases. No mentioning about agriculture and food production here. The action plan should include ambitious and achievable objectives, reduction targets, and timelines. The need for increased and targeted funding under Horizon Europe for advanced non-animal models. The private sector can be actively involved in the plan. And prioritize actions to educate, train, and more importantly, retrain scientists, researchers, and technicians in using advanced non-animal models and in sharing best practices. And academic institutions have an essential role to play in terms of promoting alternatives to animal testing in scientific disciplines and disseminating new knowledge and practices which are available but not always widely used. And lastly, ensure knowledge transfer and provide financial support to non-EU countries where scientists may be unaware of alternative methods and where testing facilities may lack the necessary research infrastructure. So these points give you some background on what Europe intends to do in the future. It's not done yet. It's an action plan that the European Commission has to develop. So these are the points the Parliament asked the Commission to do. And this motion was put on vote in the European Parliament, and there were 667 votes for, 4 against, and 16 abstentions. So no need to say that it's very important that Europe wants us to move into a direction of less or even no animals being used for animal experiments. So with that in mind, I give the floor to Giuseppe Bee. Giuseppe is a leader of a work package in PIGWEB project on a research toolbox using non and minimally invasive experimental methods. And Giuseppe works at Agroscope, and he's the leading researcher in swine nutrition and pork quality. So Giuseppe, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Then the question is, do we still need animal experimentation? So when questioning the purpose of animal experimentation, one needs first to ask several relevant questions concerning livestock experiments. Here I need also to mention that I will refer to animal experiments which are related to livestock production and not to animal experimentation, medical or pharmaceutical research. That said, I will ask several questions and provide answers from my point of view to these questions. How are the experiments planned and performed, and who is authorized to perform them? Why do we perform livestock trials, and how is the relationship between big data and the modeling approach that use big data and the in vivo trials? So try to answer the questions why models might not be always sufficient to replace in vivo trials. An important question is also what happens if we do not perform livestock trials in Europe. And last but not least, since this webinar, as Jaap already said, is organized by the PIGWEB consortium, show how the PIGWEB project contributes to European pig research. So regarding the first question, how do animal scientists generally proceed when planning a livestock experiment? The whole process starts with an idea or the wish to get a better understanding of biological process that leads to knowledge gain. It's about knowledge gain. The ideas for an animal experiment might come from results of previous experiments where some answers were not obtained or new questions came up, from requests from stakeholders regarding a specific topic that is of interest to them, or just from new ideas that might have been developed in discussions with research partners or stakeholders. This idea will then be discussed, and then working hypotheses will be developed in research teams. Then the question will come up on how answers to the formulated hypothesis can be obtained. Based on the principle of the 3 R's, replace, reduce, refine, it will be discussed whether an in vitro trial or modeling approach or in vivo trials are necessary to get an answer to this research question. So if one comes then to the conclusion that only an in vivo trial answers the question, only the in vivo trial answers the question that has been posed, then there will be a process of planning the experiments, decide on all the measurements required to obtain that answers. And then in the following step, the researcher needs to write an animal ethics application where it is specified the why the experiment is necessary and the how the experiments will be performed. In the ethical application, the researcher needs to justify the number of animals necessary to answer the research question. And in addition, the applicant needs also to make a weighing of interest. That's a really important part. The weighing of interest is actually the assessment of the experiment with regard to the balance between the expected gain of knowledge and the pain, suffering, or anxiety inflicted to the animal involved in the experiments. Thus, the question needs to be answered whether the expected knowledge gain justify the animal experiment per se. The ethics committee then will check this application and will judge, and if it is okay, then the experiment is then approved. Only then the study can be performed, and the following steps have nothing to do with the animal experiments per se, but are relevant regarding the weighing of interest. Because the obtained data must then be carefully evaluated, and the outcome must be then communicated, disseminated, and exploited. So one needs also to be aware that only trained scientists and personnel can perform studies, that these persons need to follow specific courses targeting questions regarding animal handling, animal welfare, animal behavior, animal pain, or also animal care. Only after being certified, they are allowed to be involved in animal experiments. Examples of questions or current challenges that, in my opinion, need an in vivo approach are questions like production efficiency due to limited nutrient resources, or questions related to pollution caused by livestock production, or animal health and animal welfare in livestock production system due to increasing awareness of the general public on these issues, or questions on product quality, especially due to the increasing concern in consuming meat. As already insinuated, answers to these questions need the in vivo approach where the complex system animal as a whole is used. Yes, we have big data sets from all the experiments carried out all over the place in the world. However, the general accessibility of this data is not always given. Hopefully, with the increasing awareness among researchers that research data are a valuable source of information and should be shared in the data repository, the accessibility of this data will certainly, and I hope so, will increase. There are recent initiatives like the one started by the Animal Consortium, who launched the journal Animal Open Space, where sharing data, raw data behind the research is mandatory for publication, and those make this data available. Nevertheless, big data sets come from past experiments. The big data can help to develop new or improve existing mechanistic model that simulate process occurring in the animal and responses that this process will provoke. To validate these models, in vivo trials will still be needed, trials that will confirm the model or create new data to improve the model. The models will also generate new hypotheses, which can only be tested, in my opinion, using again the in vivo approach. Ultimately, this development will reduce, by how much I don't know, but will reduce the number of experiments, but in my opinion, never replace the number of animal trials. Let's assume animal experimentation will be limited or highly restricted in the EU. What will happen? Unless there is a consensus worldwide to markedly limit animal experimentations, trials with livestock will be performed elsewhere. Experimental conditions will not be comparable to the standards in Europe, and results might not be applicable to Europe as they are performed under completely different environmental conditions. An important part is also that innovation and competitiveness of the European livestock sector will be compromised. As said before, the webinar is organized by the PIGWEB consortium, and the question can be raised how the PIGWEB project contributes to the discussion on in vivo livestock experimentation. And also already mentioned by Jaap, the project that started 1 year ago aims to strengthen the pig research community by providing and facilitating access to research infrastructure, reinforce a culture of cooperation between the research community and the involved stakeholders, and improve the services provided by the research infrastructures. As an example, one task within PIGWEB is to define SOPs in pig research, and by doing so, make research methods among research infrastructures comparable. Another relevant task is to develop minimally invasive experimental methods that ultimately will improve animal welfare during animal experimentation. So, to conclude my presentation, I have some take-home messages from my point of view regarding livestock experimentations. We have to be aware that animal experiments are hypothesis-driven, carefully planned and performed by trained personnel. Big data and the modeling approach help to reduce but never replace animal experiments. And I think innovation and progress require testing under controlled and reproducible conditions. And the outcomes of projects like PIGWEB will propose alternative experimental methods for animal experiments. And last but not least, I think researchers must increasingly engage in the open discussion with the general public about the purpose of animal experimentation. This will help to get a better understanding, the general public, why they are necessary. These experiments are necessary also for the common good. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I give back the floor.
Thank you, Giuseppe. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions to Giuseppe through the Q&A box that should be somewhere on your screen. Ask your questions, ask issues that you'd like to discuss or that we have you'd like us to discuss. So we move forward with the program, and Carlos Piñeiro is the next speaker. Carlos is director of PIGChamp Pro Europe, and PIGChamp is a company that contributes to the development of the strategies for the implementation of information management systems in livestock and related services, as well as for research. So, Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yep, the purpose and the reason that we are here today, we are dedicated to two business lines. The first one is applied research. We work as a CRO. And the second one, and the most growing one, is that we're dedicated to data management and information systems. So we use a lot of data of different types of to answer questions, because at the very end, a trial or an information system, these are the head and tails to answer questions. So we will try to share our expertise in here about this. We will review briefly which are the scenarios, which are the options right now for quality applied research, one way, the other, a combination, even a new proposal that we are shaping right now. We will try to define briefly the strengths and the weaknesses of every option, and even propose a new hybrid model that we are working right now and shaping right now, as is the living farms model. Well, the first one is a classical one, and Dr. Bee has explained it very nicely, the research stations. I think that the strengths are very well known, a lot of expertise in the people that is working there, a lot of accuracy in the experiments. There's the ability of deal with a high variety of topics, including nutrition, health, welfare, pollutant emissions, very, very wide, and not only independently, but also in combination. Everything is very well controlled, programmed, even the samplings. I think that could be considered also a strength, the low presence of non-control variability. This is, of course, one of the main objectives in an experiment, to produce a clean result. And this is something that well, it's a nice result, but that is not always reflecting well field conditions. This is in between the strengths and the weaknesses, because some of the weaknesses also are very well defined, since the number of replicates, the N, is sometimes it's a limitation to have a serious probability of having something, of having an effect, in particular with reproductive animals. The animal experiments every day need to face more and more controls and committees and ethics, which is something that is becoming harder. It's extremely difficult, or from difficult or extremely difficult, depending on the farm factors or the important or relevant factors that you would like to include. Different types of housing, different types of ventilation, health status, seasonality, different types of management, or even human behavior. This is not easy at all, very difficult to include in the experiments, and repeat the experiments to analyze and to study the time effects regarding to longevity of the animals, in particular reproductive animals, the incidence of diseases over time, or keeping blocks from mating to slaughter. Sometimes it's quite straight to run a piglet trial or a finishes trials or whatever. But if you want to link the blocks and start working with the gills in swine, for instance, and keep on working in gestating sows, and keep on working in lactating sows, and keep on working in the progeny during the lactation period, or in nursery, or in the finisher part, or even in the abattoir, is not easy to keep those blocks properly controlled. The big data for research is something that is quite new. In fact, it's something that, from the theoretical point of view, is perfectly possible. And the good thing is that, well, big data, it's quite intuitive. There's a huge amount of data of good quality. It starts being available, but it's not so available as many people think. And when it's available from single sources. The good thing another good thing from big data is that small existing effects can be detected, since you have normally a large amount of data of good quality after some processing, so small effects can be detected. This can lead to deal with new models of higher complexity, and it's not always explanatory. It's not always something that we can, well, this happened and now we can explain, but we can run also for predictive and even prescriptive analytics using different techniques of artificial intelligence, different models of machine learning. But there's a lot of weaknesses. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Because when we say big data, not everything is big data. And reliable big data has little availability yet. There are up to 7 V's, as it's called, around big data. And these three are the most important. Big data is not only a large amount of data. It's not only the volume, it's the variety, it's different sources of data, and the velocity that you are dealing with them and you process them. And these last two, this variety and velocity, are not always available. Private data from companies are sometimes difficult, hard, or even impossible to obtain and use for many reasons, because this could be sensitive data, because of the quality, because of the willingness, or whatever. Sometimes, well, I have data, I have many data, and these parts can be overcome, but to what extent are adequate and what are interesting for us? Sometimes the available data are not very related with the main topics that we're looking for, or cannot be directly addressed. Another thing that is right now is a weakness that will be overcome is that we don't need only data scientists. We also need scientists working together, because it's something that if you want to do research with big data, it's not something that you analyze what happens. Sometimes you're going to design this way or this other way so you can collect the data that are produced later on, the big data, and you need some, let's say, input of experimental design. And this is impossible also for certain topics, because for data that are let's say, producing a routine is okay, is fine, but specific data related, for instance, digestibility or some other topics is impossible to work with using big data. And this new business model that we are start working with that, and we call it the living farms model, which is a kind of something that is coming from the living labs concept. It's quite attractive because we have digital technologies that can collect huge amount of data from real farms in different aspects, from health, antibiotics, biosecurity, climate, feed, transport, abattoir, of high quality. You don't need huge effort and huge investments to start collecting this. They're matching nicely with farm conditions. And this is leading that farms at the same time will be able, commercial farms will be able to produce kilograms of meat, but also kilograms of data. And if properly done, clustering and merging from batches to barns to farms to different groups of elements can be with little effort used. And investment done in this approach also supports better production, which is something that is pushing in that direction. The first weakness is that is something very new. There's certain openness in the industry to say, well, okay, I can do that, but need a very specific training from vets, from advisors, from farms worker, and needs also not only the implementation of the applied research concept, but also the information system protocols in a routine. So what we see and we expect as quite likely is that we will need for a time research stations for certain topics and for quality research. We can start doing, if we are able to overcome some of these problems, explain big data based research only for certain topics in a certain way, and probably will be or can be combined with this living farms based research. I have a short video of one of these living farms concept that is in this case is related to gills, where we have, this is for nutrition, and in this case is for precision nutrition, since we are combining two different types of feed that are controlled real time, etc. So we can do many things. Some of these equipment are right now working in some research stations, and they are perfectly applicable. You see the two entries for the feeding here. So this is something that step by step can be also a useful model for the sector. So this is what we're doing right now, and our point of view to this topic that I think that is going to be very interesting in the next decade. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Carlos, for this presentation. We'll now move forward with some thoughts from Francis Eugenio. And Francis is a PhD student from the Philippines working at INRAE, and his program is financed by INRAE and BCF Life Sciences. But again, before giving the floor to Francis, please ask your questions in the Q&A session, and we'll address these after Francis' presentation. Francis, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Francis Eugenio. I'm like Yap said, I'm a CIF PhD student from the Philippines, working now in Repigase in collaboration with BCF Life Sciences. First, I'd like to thank the first two speakers for their very insightful presentations, and as well as PIGWEB, and in particular the organizers of this very interesting webinar. For me as a young scientist, the debate of animal experimentation versus big data is a significant one. I would say that, of course, there are various factors in play, like the socioeconomic factors and the general acceptance of animal experiments, maybe not within our professional circles, but for society as a whole. But if allowed, I also think that I, along with probably with other young researchers, have a personal stake in the debate as well. As it would impact the trajectory of our future careers. I'm not sure if I speak for everyone, but at least for me, my training is that if I have a very specific scientific question, my immediate reaction is that we should design an experiment to check it. Of course, that comes from a place where research tools are not as extensive as what is currently now in Europe, and where big data is not really available. But however, I also do acknowledge the fact that animal experimentations could not only be more refined, but overall reduced. This comes from the fact that there are certain specific scientific questions that have already been extensively researched. Like, for example, let's say low protein diets. I would say the extensive and multi-pronged research that has been done and published in the subject means that there's a vast wealth of information out there that I think that we can still squeeze some of information out of it in an effort to learn more. What I mean is the amount of work and time that can be allotted to animal experiments not equal to the amount of time and work in extensively looking at available information? This is a very nice question to ask, especially for young scientists like me, because it would allow us to study in a different way, study not perform animal experimentations, but still get information out there. Currently, this is basically meta-analysis, and I think that it's currently being underutilized to some extent. I think part of this is that the training that we have, not just us in the direction of doing research by experimentation, instead of using the available big data that we already have and built, like the previous speakers already mentioned. And plus, I think that the fact that totally open data is still somewhat of a recent concept, but more importantly, it's still not totally free. That is also not to say that animal experimentations should be totally abandoned, because I think it's still very valid for understanding biology and its underlying mechanisms. But I think that things can be done for it to be reduced and especially refined with the data that we generate to be mostly open, to be others for other people, other scientists to also explore. Each one of us will be, or maybe are already experts in only a handful of things. I believe that. And having open data allows other experiments, other experts, other scientists to maybe look into our data in another way and maybe extract different kinds of information from what we already reported. This type of collaboration, I believe, can do more good than harm, especially for us young scientists. So in my opinion, my final words I would say is that I do believe that using big data to answer scientific questions is part of the future, but totally abandoning animal experiments should not be an indirect result of it. Rather, for us young researchers, I believe that the collaboration and exchange of ideas and data is the future, and that trainings and more information about how to make use of this big data should be more available. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for this for this talk and your thoughts on this important issue that is basically your future. I now give the floor to Katrien. Katrien is a researcher in RAI, and she will lead the discussion. Katrien, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We will begin by a little poll. Compared to today, how much do you think we can eventually reduce animal experimentation? So it's your opinion. We will give you a little time to answer the question. Thank you. So you can see the result. So you are quite half between zero, something more than 0 and 3/4. So if very few percent say 100%, so we still have some margin to reduce our experiments. So now we will go on for the second question. What should be the relative role of the actors involved to attain this reduction? So you can answer policymakers, researchers, industry, or society. Let's see the results. So you are confident in the policymakers and in the society also, and a little less for industry and researchers. Maybe we can go on with a question from the audience. So don't hesitate to put your question in the Q&A. So I will begin by a comment on from Iliakis. So he made it during the Giuseppe talk. So he said that the argument that experiments will be performed in other parts of the world if they are not allowed in Europe is not new. And he gave the example of primate research. And he concluded that very quickly stakeholders decided that it was not a tenable position, which led to significant reduction of research in live primates across the world. Giuseppe might answer this question, please.
It's a good point. That might be true, but I think we all agree that the number of animal experiments can be reduced by how much we have seen them. But I think animal experiments, or at least when I talk to the industry, they say if we don't do when we are testing products or stuff like that, and we need animal experiment to approve certain products or so, then if they can't do it here in Europe, they will go elsewhere. So they will move away, and they will not reduce because the necessity to test some feed ingredients, they have to prove that, and if that's not allowed here in Europe, then they will go away somewhere else. But that might be true that it is that if Europe decides to reduce markedly the animal experimentation, that all over the place, they will have an impact on all over the place. Might happen. I can't comment on that actually, but I think for my thought is that for the innovation and of the livestock sector in Europe, a certain amount of experiments need to be done in Europe for the innovation capacity of the European livestock sector. That's my opinion. I don't know if I answered the question, but
you made your point. Francis, can you open your mic?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just my opinion as well is I come from the Philippines. I don't know if you notice in the camera, I'm not European. So I come from the Philippines, and in many instances, I would say that all of I can speak about East Asian countries that maybe primate research is not really that big of a research tool there. It is not done. I think it would transfer to countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, maybe even China, or even parts of Latin America. So I'm not really sure if the example of primate research is totally comparable to the livestock research that we're talking about, specifically pigs. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have questions for Carlos. So Can we say that big data for research has a weakness in addition to what you have mentioned, which is because they are difficult to handle? Is a difficulty to handle them?
Yeah. Now, yeah. Well, it's only one of the difficulties that big data has. And probably before that, my main concern is the availability. Who is going to share those data with you? Is an institution? Is a government? Is a private company? What type of data? Because when we talk about big data in nutrition or in animal welfare or in health, which is the structure, which is what we have in our hands. Later on, of course, is the difficulty of the question. We need to handle that. And it's not only a question for scientists, it's a question for data scientists, something that we have learning right now. In our team, we have 2 data scientists that are mathematicians and informatic engineers. So it's not only let's say, the experimental design approach. Of course, I think that big data is going to help us a lot in many aspects, probably including this. But it's something that is not likely to happen to do quality research short term because of these 2 or 3 initial problems. So yes, I think that we will get something from there, but right now we have very little availability of the raw material that we need to run a proper research. So it will take some time for sure.
So I will go on big data. So a question from Cornelia. She's not sure how big data can replace experiments on challenged pigs, for example, different diets, or to give information on physiological functions.
Can be done to a certain extent. Can be done. For instance, if you go different levels of amino acids of whatever, if you have let's say, the right barns with the right equipment, controlling the main sources of variability because of sex, because of weight, because of breed, or whatever, explained before that. For that, we need to combine the knowledge of the classical animal research in terms of experimental design, number of replicates, with the farm equipment, something similar of what I've shown before, that is something that is robust and reliable, etc. With the tons of data that that equipment is sending, because it's sending every 15 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever. So for me, this is not something to be afraid. It's something that is very manageable. Compared to the other problems. The rest of the problems are very serious. This in particular, for me, is quite feasible to do it under practical conditions.
I have a question for Francis. Thank you, Francis, especially for highlighting more future thinking perspectives on how animal experiments can be reduced. Would any of you be able to comment more on how we as researchers can support the reduction in unnecessary research, including underpowered studies that repeat previous findings, etc. Maybe we'll begin by the first part of the question.
Okay, so, can I go? Yeah. Yeah. I think the first step to do that is to have more open data. Underpowered experiments, studies, like you said, studies that repeat previous studies. I think that if their data was open, if open data is freely available, and I mean free in terms of anyone can be able to access them, I think this unnecessary experiments will begin to dwindle. It's just because information would be used by more people. Any other things that can be done after that is, I think, should be and can be handled by an ethics board, being controlling, like what Giuseppe already mentioned earlier, controlling the how and which steps can we do for animal experiments. And yeah, I think, yeah, those are 2 approaches that I'm thinking of.
And do you think that the focus on reducing meat consumption and find meat alternatives can and should influence our perspective on livestock research?
Personally, I think no. It's because the focus on reduction of meat consumption should come also with the reduction of, let's say, it's a different topic altogether, but reduction in population as well. If you're not really reducing population and you're still not producing meat eaters, but you still have people who choose to eat meat, it should not influence the perspective and livestock research moving forward, because I'm sure that there will be just more mouths to feed. My opinion.
Short comment about open data. Sometimes open data sounds very exciting, but in many occasions the interest is quite limited, because most of the interesting data is coming from the industry. So sometimes it's well, it's nice. It's a factor that, well, let's say, we can put in the model, but probably not only with open data we can do something interesting enough. And something else, that the data are open and are available, it doesn't mean that it's easy, cheap, or even free. Not at all. So when you're dealing with, I don't know, weather data or other that is important for the experiments, is there. We have been working, for instance, with data from the Spanish agency, weather agency, and it's something that, well, is there, but it's not so straight. So there's a number of obstacles regarding this. First, not very interesting many times, and secondly, very particularly difficult to handle.
I have a question maybe for everyone, which is from Candido Pomar, because it's for the future. We educate future researchers primarily to do animal research. Do you think that to reduce animal experimentation, we should enforce the education in future scientists of alternative research methods, such as meta-analysis, mathematical model, big data, and adapting new knowledge from other research areas, such human research, etc.? So who wants to begin this answer? Maybe Giuseppe.
Yeah, I think that the classical animal scientist might not be trained to do that up to now, and that's something we should focus on. But still, we need also, we don't need just data scientists. I think we need also people who understands the animal per se, and so it is a combination, probably a collaboration between data scientists and animal scientists are what we should aim for. And we should, I assume that the new breeds of animal scientists should know a little bit of data scientists, but they should be well trained in what they should know about physiology and so on. And the data scientists, they should know a little bit, if they go into livestock production or in that, they start to understand a little bit, but then they should collaborate. I don't think we should go for train them just in that, because otherwise then we will not have animal experimentation, because nobody knows how to set up an animal experiment. It's a little bit extreme said, but just I think a collaboration is better of both breeds of people, young scientists.
Yep, you would like to add a word?
I think that is one issue that the European Commission put on the motion. Is it about training young scientists, or is it about training the trainers, that they become more aware that there's much more to be gained from data than we've done in the past? And in the past, if there was an issue and something to be studied, first reflex was we do an animal experiment and don't go back to the literature, the old literature, the relevant literature, and see, is there an answer to be found there? And I think retraining current generation of scientists is a big issue. And perhaps by doing so, you also train the future generations, of course, but perhaps the target should be mainly the current generation of scientists to train them in alternative methods and meta-analysis and big data analysis. And as Giuseppe said, that's not something that you do easily, especially with big data analysis, but we have to change a little bit the mindset.
Oh, Carlos. Okay, Carlos.
Again, short comment on this. Research based on big data is so interesting that even if we don't have this restriction or concern, because if we should keep on working with animals or not, would be good enough to start doing that for many reasons. And answering specifically the question, it's always combining different sources of knowledge, different mindsets. The mathematicians one, the engineers one, the vets one, the agronomists one, is always good. It's very powerful in terms of delivering new insights and approaches or whatever. So I strongly recommend any student that is going this way to include other topics regarding big data or Internet of the Things or Internet of the Swine Things, as we call it, to understand better things. For me, the answer is a big yes.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of unanswered questions. I'm sorry, but we will have to finish this webinar. Maybe if some can just answer in the Q&A, they can write an answer if they wish, and I will leave the last word to Jaap.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Well, first of all, thank you very much, the speakers, for the presentations. And I also like to thank the audience for all the questions that were raised, issues that were raised. The fact that there's a large number of open issues means that this is something to be continued. We have to discuss about this because it is a very important topic, a sensitive topic. Society is, of course, is worried about animal production. And they are, of course, even more worried about research in animal production, using animals for production purposes. So that is something that we have to think about, and we have to be, as a research community, be more proactive, because we have to engage in an open and constructive debate with society on this. And when you answered the poll question about who should be involved, of course, legislations are involved. They set the rules. Society is involved. They have an opinion. Researchers should be involved. But we're not the only ones who are going to make the decision and have knowledge about this topic. So we have to be more open. And perhaps in the past we have been too silent about animal production and about animal production research, because it was something that was not to be shown. And if we want to have an open debate with society on this, it's something we have to be more proactive. The last point is about the data, the big data. I think we've had access to experimental facilities, and probably it's not only about underpowered research. I think there's so much research results that are being published that are underused, not just in terms of meta-analysis, but in general, they are underused. You can all imagine research about the nutrition requirement of something and how many studies have been done on a specific amino acid. Well, were they all necessary? And they have been done in the past, and there's still a lot of value in these research settings. So we should use that old data that has been published for more than a century now, much more extensively than we've done in the past. And of course, with the big data and what Carlos was mentioning, also the new technologies, they provide so much more opportunities, because you don't have to have the gold standard to measure things. And there are nowadays ways to measure things in real time, and we have to find ways to let the animal talk through these measurements that we can take about feeding behavior, drinking behavior, social behavior. And they're all non-invasive, but these measurements can talk about the animal's status. And of course, what Francis was mentioning also is that needs open data, because if that data remains in a drawer or behind some kind of a wall, it's not going to be used. So open data and make data accessible to all is very important. Now, having said that, we will, within the PIGWEB project, we will think more about how to move forward with this, with you, with society on this very important issue. So we'll try to answer perhaps some of your questions. We'll give it more thoughts about how to move forward, because this was not a one-shot issue. It's something that we want to continue throughout the lifetime of the project. It doesn't concern only pigs, it concerns all animals. So we have to think also with other projects how we move this forward. So with this, I'd like to thank all of you for participating. I hope you had a great webinar, and I hope to see you soon somewhere and to talk more about this or other aspects. Thank you.